So we talked about the play calling. Now let's get into the other comments that Jarvis made in his podcast with Leonard Fournette. And the big picture from this is, what does it say about Kevin Stefanski that so many players feel comfortable kind of bashing him now? This is the comments from Jarvis Landry on a podcast with Leonard Fournette.
Being in Cleveland and playing there, you know, he was cool to be around. It's like you say, it's like, it just almost felt like, you know, as much as he knew what he was doing, right, he really maybe didn't, right? And I think that, like, sometimes, you know, some of these coaches or most of these coaches get put in a position too soon, right? True. You know, they have success as a position coach, right? Mm-hmm. And then they get thrown into this head coaching role where, you know, you expect most of these coaches that's younger to be more personable, right? More relatable with their players. Yeah. And in most cases, it just doesn't work out that way, right? And I know, like, my time in Cleveland, especially in the beginning, man, it was great. Like, he ended up winning Coach of the Year. You know, we ended up going to the playoffs. And then for some reason, then after, bro, it just kind of felt like, you know, the spark between the connection between the players and the coaches just kind of started to dim out, right? Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if he'd be a great coach in the league, right? But I do think he knows a lot about offense, right? I think, you know, I don't know how much he is involved into the analytical side of things, but I know in Cleveland that was a huge part. So, you know, I think that played a part in some of the decisions that he may have been forced to make, even with the Shedeur Sanders thing, right? Yeah. Either forced to make or persuaded to make. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That last part was interesting to me.
Yeah, what do you guys make of that?
We've always talked about the marriage between the front office and the head coaching staff and the product on the field as it pertains to analytics. Now, all of that would be secondhand information. He obviously hasn't been inside the organization. Sounds to me like he might be talking to someone who's still here, who's saying to him, yeah, Kevin's being forced to do things by the analytic department that I don't think he's completely behind. Is that the way you read it?
Oh, yeah. Well, he said that.
Yeah.
He flat out said it. And, you know, I agree with a lot of what Jarvis said there.
Especially the end.
Well, in just terms of, like, guys get thrust in positions before they're ready for them. And we've talked about that. Just because you're a good coordinator doesn't mean you're going to be a good coach. And relating to players, again, I just think that there was a lot, like, there's NFL drama and then there's Cleveland drama. And Cleveland drama always seems, you don't see this go on in other.
No, we always lead the league in drama.
In other markets, some of the nonsense that goes on here. And I think this nonsense just got away from them, which, again, is why I'm curious to see how it goes in Atlanta. Because Atlanta, outside of the Michael Vick stuff, obviously it's a whole other level. But outside of that, I don't know if they've had a ton of stuff, nonsense and stuff like this. So we'll see. Like, I do agree. Kevin is best in a situation where there's strong leadership within the locker room. And they didn't have that in Cleveland. There wasn't a ton of great leaders here, player leaders.
Right.
And that's the type of team where I think he would have the best success, where if he needs to come in and be sort of the Monken, he's not Todd Monken.
No.
So we'll see how it goes in Atlanta. I'm really curious to see how this all plays out. But I don't think Jarvis was off on anything that he said there.
I think when you look, I've always said this. Like, you know, when you look at Kevin Stefanski, my main issue with Kevin Stefanski was just the communication. Quinshon Judkins talked about it, and he said, you know, he was on a podcast, and he said, you know, how is Todd Monken? Not to say that Todd Monken, because he has a different communication style, is going to be more successful than Kevin Stefanski. Football is more difficult than that. Just because you're a good communicator does not mean you're going to have X's and O's that's going to break the right way. And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is Quinshon Judkins said, you know, with Todd Monken, it was more personable. I felt like I had a clear, a clear roadmap as to what they expected from me, what they wanted from me, what they wanted to see. And I've always thought that me as a former player, I always saw eye to eye with coaches that were more personable and were able to communicate, whether good, bad, or indifferent, whether you were upset with me. I always knew where I was with you. If you didn't agree with something I was doing, you let me know. If you told me this was my role, you stuck to what that role was. If I was doing something, and you know, the communication part just seems like there's a lot of people who had an issue with the way Kevin Stefanski went about his, and I even said, hey, I think he should have used the media more. Like he a lot of the stuff that he got in the media was because he was super vague with a lot of stuff.
100%.
He didn't even give himself an opportunity to kind of defend and deflect some of this stuff. So what ends up happening is if you don't have good communication with the media, you know what's going to happen. They're going to be on you. And then if you don't have good communication with the players, then maybe some of those players aren't going to go to bat for you and say, hold on. I heard a lot about Kevin Stefanski, but let me tell you what Kevin Stefanski has done for me, this, that, and third. And I thought one of the biggest examples of that was when he talked about his relationship with David Njoku. And he talked about after it was over and he kind of knew the writing was on the wall, he talked about him talking with David Njoku and telling him some tough things, and David Njoku turned around, grew up, and ended up becoming one of his biggest advocates. So for me, I'm not going to ever say, I may not agree with Kevin Stefanski's offense. I may not agree with Kevin Stefanski as a particular coach. That's my temperament. But I will always say that a person has an opportunity to grow and figure out what they need to do better in a different position. So I think he should probably take what he did here and as a young coach and a first-time coach and use it to an example and say, I'm going to fix this in another place, because now people are coming out saying, yeah, I kind of had a problem with that. I kind of had a problem with this. And we'll see how he takes advantage of it or uses it to his advantage.
To that point, I just thought of this. What you said triggered when Mike Brown was here with the Cavs the first time. He struggled to relate and connect with players. When he was here the second time, he struggled to relate and connect with players. He went to Golden State and learned under Steve Kerr and became a completely different coach. After that, I sat down with him for probably an hour and a half, 2 hours in Detroit. Sacramento was playing in Detroit, and I drove up to do a piece on him. He was a completely different dude, and he said, I learned under Steve that all the things that I had to get done in practice were for me. Mm-hmm. It wasn't for them. It was so that I could check this box off and say, okay, we accomplished this today. No matter how long it took, we were going to get this done, and it turned off a lot of players. I'm just making the connection.
Kenny Atkinson said the same thing. From his first stint with Brooklyn to now, after stopping in Golden State and working with Steve Kerr, how he's much more relatable to the players. The reason he got kicked out of Brooklyn or fired was he didn't relate with Kevin and Kyrie, and they wanted Steve Nash as the coach.
And I struggle sometimes with like how important, because I'm not saying this sarcastically, I'm truly asking how important is a bedside manner when you're a coach, because sometimes I think it's not that important, and sometimes I think it's very important.
To some people it is.
Well, there's anomalies. I think if you're Bill Belichick, media relations and bedside manner matter this much.
Okay, because you win Super Bowls.
Because his football acumen and his genius was so superior that players did something with him that they're not willing to do with other coaches.
Right.
You get cachet, you get good grace because we win and we like to win. That's why things were going so well with Kevin and the players. They were winning. When things started to go south, then all of the cracks in the armor started to show themselves, because you don't show your character when you're winning. Character is exposed when you lose. You learn more about yourself in defeat than you ever will in victory. And I think what this drives home to me more than anything else is the art of hiring a head coach. Those that are in consideration for the job all have one thing in common: football acumen. Mm-hmm. Their IQ with the game of football is off the charts. But oftentimes they fail because they lack the bedside manner, because when you come in, that football acumen is ground zero for players. That's expected. How are you going to treat us interpersonally and as a group? And that's where Kevin failed. And I agree with you, is that he's fine on a team with strong leadership, because that stuff is handled by the leaders.
Yes.
Does anybody look at Brian Billick as a leader of men and a great head coach? No. He had the luxury of coaching when he had the all-time great leader on the football field on his roster. His best player was his best leader. So Brian Billick's shortcomings as a leader of men were overcome, because at 12:55, it wasn't Brian Billick huddling the players up. It was Ray Lewis. And the last thing they heard was fire and brimstone from their leader. 52. Let's go do it. And Kevin is never going to be that guy.
No.
And so I think that the coaches that have succinct. We've talked about this. You get 2 cracks at this. And if you don't master it in one of the 2, and by the way, Kevin didn't master it here.
No.
The 2 coaches of the year are great cherries on top, but there's nothing underneath it. His career record, he's under 500 by 10 games. So he didn't master it here. So he's going to get Atlanta to figure it out. And if he does, if he wants to, he'll stay there a decade or he'll get a 3rd opportunity. If he doesn't, he'll sit out a year and become a coordinator somewhere or go back to college and do that route, which is kind of the new way of revitalizing your career. But he's going to need strong leadership in that locker room. And he didn't have it in Cleveland, and that's when things fractured. You have to be the loudest voice in the room. It can't be one of your players. I think it's good if you have players that are leaders, but when the ship is taking water, it's not up to the head engineer to rally the troops to save the day. It's the captain. Everyone's looking at the captain in times of crisis, and he is woefully deficient in that role. And handling the media, I give him a D-.
I'll be curious to see if that changes.
Because some guys do. Some guys are introspective and they look back at, or they talk to other coaches and they say, where did I go wrong?
Yeah.
Look at yourself. And, I talk on the show about how when Tibbs was fired after his first go-round and then he took a job at ESPN, and one of the things I asked him, not on the air, off it, I said, what have you been doing to reinvent yourself? And he said, I went back to school. I called all the coaches that I have relationships with and I said, hey, can I come down and spend 3 months with you and watch your process and see how another head coach does it?
Well, Jay, you worked in newsrooms, you worked in newspapers, big organizations with media outlets. You need allies.
Absolutely.
You need allies that are your coworkers. You need allies that are on the top level. And then you might need a couple of them up there that you just touch in with every once in a while. You need somebody to say when behind the door closed meetings, you need one person to at least go to bat for you.
Yeah. You need Bill Belichick to call your owner and say, be patient. Yeah, you got the right guy.
He's all right. He's going to grow a little bit. And here's the thing. I always say, by the way, Todd Monken will go through growing pains. He's a first-time head coach.
Of course he will.
Look, people think I hate Kevin Stefanski. I don't hate Kevin Stefanski. We can have a football conversation, but the thing that Jarvis did eloquently say is, man, listen, when you a first-year coach and you don't know what you know, there are certain things when I was a first-time host that I didn't know what I didn't know. But I had the opportunity and the grace to get to a point where I can be seasoned. Some people don't get that chance and opportunity. Yeah. I think he's smart enough. He will realize, okay, I made some missteps. And just the same way we talk about Andrew Berry. Andrew Berry, in terms of drafting, Andrew Berry made some missteps. Hopefully he can figure it out. He hit with some of these other guys. Yeah. Can you figure out offensive line and receiver?
Yeah.
That's how we're judged in football. You made a mistake. What the heck you going to do to clean it up? But as long as he don't clean it up on our watch against the Browns, we fine.
So UK was 16-1, but Browns beat him.
I don't know about 16-1, 8-8 or something like that. We can't do all that.